Several characters discuss prophecy throughout Phase 1. Eraser Meow says that his claims are prophecies, and he says that means they are like words received from God, an inevitable future. Tojiro echoes this same exact sentiment when he talks to Meow in the restaurant. The mysterious message instructing Meow to kill them also mentions that some sort of hell is a prophecy, though also a memory. Finally, to cap it all off, Seshat and Tojiro discuss whether or not the biblical Book of Revelation is a work of prophecy in the final data fragment. What is the significance of this? Can the future be reliably foretold? I believe it can. I think Eraser Meow lays it out accurately. Statements referred to as prophecy must inevitably come true. This is the nature of the game they're playing. It's like red text. Red statements typically apply to the present, but prophecy is always about the future. Throughout the story, there's commentary about how accurate predictions can be very powerful, and Eraser Meow doesn't mind lording this advantage over Meow. At the end of Chapter 24, A Kid's Meal of Natural Disasters, Meow starts to turn the tide a little bit, extracting information out of Eraser Meow more on his own terms. However, I think Phase 1 is still the early part of the story, where the protagonist has no grasp of how to play the game effectively. So why do I trust in prophecy? Well, for one, because Eraser Meow says so. It seems to me like he's genuinely confused why Meow doesn't believe him, and he forgot to explain this fact about prophecy that is so obvious from his perspective. It doesn't seem like he's trying to trick him at that moment. And if he is, it's a weird, crappy trick. He makes a bunch of outlandish predictions, and Meow can't confirm or deny any of them until way later. He seems like he's trying to get Meow to erase himself, but he says he wanted that to happen before the kid's meal even arrived, which is before any of his prophecies have had a chance to come true. So, if that's a trick, I don't get it. It's not very convincing at all. And for what it's worth, his prophecy about Lingji's death does eventually come true. And while his other prophecies are not confirmed, they never get contradicted either. Tojiro, as I already mentioned, says the same thing about his own prophecies. Seshat does too. She implies that prophecy is unavoidable. She doesn't like the events of Revelation and hopes they are not a prophecy. The question there isn't whether prophecy is inevitable, but whether the Book of Revelation is a work of prophecy. To be fair, none of these characters are particularly trustworthy, and it's also possible that the details of Lingji's death could have been a combination of easy guesswork and some sneaky manipulation. I'm saying I could see how other perspectives are possible here. My perspective, though, is that the nature of Ciconia is that prophecy is inevitable. I think that's just how this story works. Not only that, but I think there's a reason for it. In short, prophecies are some of the bounding requirements of a historical simulation. Let me explain. Let's start with the factory world vision, which is followed by that "My adorable Meow, kill them" message. In between those two phrases is a claim that this world is a prophecy and also a memory. How can it be both? Both the future and the past. Let's take it at face value and start with the past part of it. In the past, the factory world really did happen, and a bunch of people got their brains removed and connected to a virtual world. As I explained in my video about the why of Ciconia, this virtual world sounds like it's right out of Revelation. And to put it simply, some people are going to heaven, and others are going to hell. It depends on their deeds in life. And as I explained in my zombie apocalypse video, all these people are already zombified. Who knows how long they roamed the earth in a near invincible state before the factory started processing them. Memories of their actions in life are long gone. So how are people supposed to be judged if their lives are unknown? That's where the historical simulation comes in. If there's a giant computer that can create any kind of virtual world, why not a realistic one? The way to determine everyone's actions is to replay actual history in a simulation and see how everyone behaved, and judge them based on that. Of course, the whole issue is that there isn't perfect information about the past. So how do we know if the simulation is accurate? Well, it has to conform to certain known historical facts. For example, eventually, the factory world happens. That's what's doing this simulation. So that's a historical fact. The simulation must eventually lead to the factory world. If it doesn't, then it clearly deviates from history, and the way people behave in it is not relevant. Somebody must have made different choices, which changed the outcome to something ahistorical. We need to know the choices they really did make, when it was real and not a historical simulation. It's like this. The original timeline happened in the real world, and eventually led to the factory world, which means everyone needed to be judged. Let's call this Judgment Day. At Judgment Day, it wasn't known exactly what everyone did, but certain facts were known. Judgment Day kicks off a realistic simulation, trying to be as accurate as possible, and letting people make choices. If they make all the same choices they did in the real timeline, then the outcomes should be the same. Then they can be fairly judged on those choices. If they make different choices, some of the outcomes will change, so those simulations clearly violate history and can be ignored. This is where prophecy comes from. Any already known historical fact that the simulation will be held to can be safely used as a prophecy within the simulation. If you understand that's how this simulation is managed, you can predict that all those historic facts will eventually happen in the simulation, and you can call that a prophecy, confident in the knowledge that you are completely correct. So apparently, at Judgment Day, it's known that Meow punches Lingji's brains out, that Wisdom 199400305 falls from orbit and pollutes the water, that some biohazard will reduce humanity's reasoning ability. I'm sure lots of other things are known too. Many prophecies could be revealed. But hold on, doesn't Eraser Meow contradict this? Doesn't he contradict himself? He says all those things are inevitable, unless Meow kills himself. Isn't that right? Well, this is where I think Eraser Meow is being a sneaky when they cry antagonist. He's using a solipsistic technicality. All his predictions will still come true, but if Meow isn't around to see them, then from Meow's perspective, they don't happen. Meow avoids fate by just not being there to see it play out. And to be clear, Eraser Meow doesn't actually tell Meow to kill himself. Not exactly. Well, one time he does seem to say that at the end of Chapter 6, an identity confusion violation. But as I explained in my video about Meow's triggers, I think Eraser Meow doesn't really say that stuff. It was a glitch in Meow's perception. What Eraser Meow normally says is that Meow should will himself to disappear. What does that mean? What's the difference? Well, for example, if Meow turned off his shield and flew headfirst into the ground, he would kill himself, destroy his body, and disappear. But then there's no way for him to later kill Lingji and Koshka as prophesied. If, on the other hand, the Meow personality specifically wills itself to disappear, then Meow's body is unharmed and goes on living. Other personalities can take control of it. That way, it doesn't contradict prophecy. It's still possible that a different personality in Meow's body pushes his fist through Lingji's skull. For example, little sister Meow is a Gauntlet Knight. She could do it. The reason why she would is a different question. But my point is that Meow's personality disappearing avoids violating prophecy. Okay, so why does Eraser Meow care about that? Now we get into his identity and his motivation. I think he's just trying to save his own skin, nothing more. The very last thing in Phase 1 is Jaden, with his weird blue body, inviting Meow to that world. It seems like he's in virtual heaven. So, I think Eraser Meow is also a being in a virtual world. He's the original personality of the original Meow from the real timeline. Remember, the whole point of this simulation is to decide who goes to heaven or hell. So Eraser Meow is being judged right now on the basis of Meow's actions. He knows a lot of historic facts, and he knows a lot of bad things are about to happen in this world. It seems he thinks a lot of the blame will fall on Meow, whether rightly or wrongly. That means he himself will be judged harshly and sent to hell. His solution to avoid this is to sneak into his simulated counterpart's mind, which is ultimately probably running in his own real physical brain, and try to get him out of the picture. If Meow's personality can disappear from the world before anything bad happens, there's no way he can be blamed for it. As long as Meow is gone but the world still falls apart, it clearly shows that it was not Meow's fault, and he can freely ascend to heaven. This is what Eraser Meow wants, for Meow to not take the blame for anything, so that Eraser Meow will avoid hell and go to heaven. Now, presumably in the real timeline, there weren't blue people dropping hints about the future. That's only possible because it's a simulation. It couldn't happen the first time. So isn't this a huge deviation from history? Yes, it seems like these simulations are proceeding very differently from the real timeline, and various entities that understand the nature of this simulation are trying to manipulate it for their own ends. For example, I would not be at all surprised if there's a meta Tojiro whispering prophecy into Tojiro's tiny, tiny ear. It's hard to say whether certain events are forbidden in the simulation, as long as known historic facts are still observed. On the surface, it does seem that people having knowledge of the future would be a blatant deviation, but I think it's actually okay. I think that, in the real timeline, the Book of Revelation turned out to be an accurate prophecy, whether by coincidence or some other way. That shows that some alleged prophecy was proven correct in the real timeline, and opens the door to more prophetic ideas existing in the world and accurately predicting the future, without contradicting accepted history. The idea that Revelation is known at Judgment Day fits well with the idea that Seshat and Tojiro managed to find the single remaining copy. Revelation cannot be completely wiped out from history, because that would contradict the fact that it's still known at Judgment Day. However, it can be incredibly hidden and obscure, yet Seshat manages to find it anyway. That brings up another question. I'm saying the simulation must conform to accepted history, but how does that really work? What if it doesn't conform? What if someone does wipe every single copy of Revelation off the face of the earth? What if Meow crashes into the ground right at the start of the story? I bet some future phase will more deeply explore a situation like this, a simulation which has gone off the rails. As I said, any simulation like that has definitely deviated from history and is not useful for judging people's actions. Ultimately, that means it's not serving its purpose and can be stopped and reset. In other words, if history is violated, it's time for the scenario to loop. The end of Phase 1 seems to be very late in the timeline, with some people already living in virtual heaven, but Meow rejects it. Maybe that itself is a violation of history, and it resets even after getting that far. Maybe it will loop until Meow accepts heaven, just like the original did the first time. Looking at the story in this light brings a whole new perspective. It also raises all kinds of new questions. Who's aware of the nature of this simulation? What other kind of information is being snuck in from the future, and how? What really happened in the real timeline? Who ruined the world? Was it Meow? Or somebody trying to frame him? What does Mom know? And what is she trying to do? What about Tojiro? In a deep story like this, even if you figure something out, it often just gives you more to think about. Look forward to more videos about these topics and many others.